Hello, everyone. Welcome back. I just want to start off with a little bit of trivia to see how much you guys know about beetles. Does anyone know the longest living beetle? Anyone know? Okay, it's Paul McCartney. Ha ha ha. But that's not the kind of beetle we're going to talk about today. So I actually worked with cucumber beetles and squash bugs. Hi guys, I'm Cleo. I worked with in the Thaler lab studying chemical ecology and entomology, and I had the pleasure of working with some lovely people this summer and learning more about bugs. So to start off, people generally when they're thinking about bugs, they think of this direct interaction, right? Two bugs interacting with one another through something maybe like competition. But that's not the only way in which two bugs might interact with one another. They might also have an interaction that's mediated by a plant. So you have competition in this first example, but an indirect interaction could be something like this, where the plant actually knows that caterpillars are chewing on it, and in response they release volatiles that then actually call to this wasp that then will kill those caterpillars. And in that way, these organisms are interacting with one another in a way that's an indirect way, but they're still affecting each other. So that's a plant-mediated response. And in my talk, I'm going to mostly focus on this type. So to explain how plants are actually respond to herbivory, plants can have constitutive response defenses that are already on a plant, a fixed amount of trichomes, for example, and they can have induced defenses, so those are actually triggered by herbivore feeding. And so looking at trichomes, these are actually, a plant might opt for either spiky trichomes, so these are these non-glandular trichomes, which creates a physical barrier for herbivores, or they can have these glandular trichomes that exude a chemical defense. So in a way, they're actually a chemical defense as well, and will release secondary metabolites. So we also have plants actually are affected by these trichomes in different ways. So certain types of trichomes can actually blunt mouth parts, and they can damage the gut lining. So different plants have actually adapted to select for different herbivores, and based off of the different feeding styles of the herbivores that usually come to that plant, and the plants or the organisms themselves can actually adapt different ways to counter these different different defenses that a plant has. So why do we care about this? The plant defense is really important because organisms can interact in nature, and they can also interact in applied systems. There's generally more than one pest, and as a result, you need to be able to figure out how to use things like biocontrol in order to defend against these types of herbivores in agriculture, for example. So I'm going to introduce my system, and Brzezowski and colleagues at Cornell first we have the cucumber beetle, that's a chewing organism, and then we have the squash bug that comes on second and actually is attracted to the plant or is attracted to the cucumber beetle through its mating pheromone. And that's an example of a direct attraction, right? They both coexist on the squash plant at the same time. And Brzezowski and colleagues here at Cornell actually found that more squash bugs were appearing in both sticky traps, and more squash bugs were laying their eggs on cucumber beetle damaged plants, which is really cool. So we know that there's an attraction. My mentor, who's actually here today, wanted to take this one step further, and he wanted to see, and I helped him with this project, to see if there's a reason for this attraction, right? Is there a facilitation benefit as a result of the squash bugs being attracted to cucumber beetles on cucumber beetle damaged plants? So what we found is pretty exciting, and it's that on the y-axis you can see that on the herbivore cucumber beetle damaged plants, squash bugs actually grew more and had a higher clutch mass. So that means that the damage that a cucumber beetle causes on a squash plant is actually facilitating squash bug growth. pretty cool, right? And I wanted to really hone in, on like why, how a plant is actually changing in response to cucumber beetle herbivory in a way that is actually making the squash bugs way more and facilitating their growth. And knowing what we know from plant defense and all I shared before, I kind of was thinking about this and came to two hypotheses. The first one being that damaged plants have more trichomes on damaged plants than undamaged plants as a result of induced resistance, right? The cucumber beetle is damaging the plant, so they'll produce more, they'll become more physically dependent, is what made sense to me at the time. And then my second hypothesis is that damaged plants are less hard as a result of cucumber beetle herbivory. So jumping into my methods. We had 3 different treatments. We had the undamaged plant control that wasn't fed on. We had the mechanically damaged plant that we went through and we did hole punch clippings on, and then we added 5 cucumber beetles to the damaged plant, and we actually removed the beetles, and hence that's why I talked about indirect. I gave you those case studies about indirect interactions, because this was an indirect interaction. The beetles were gone, and then we added squash bugs, and this is the same no choice bioassay that we found the squash bugs actually did better on. So, and then I'm going to see, why that is and look at the plants. So I looked at trichome density, and using, the newly emerged leaf, I cut that off and then got a clipping for each of these different treatments and looked under image J and just randomly selected a cell area and counted the number of non-glandular trichomes, the one on the left, and the number of glandular trichomes, those with that exude that chemical secretion. And we looked at the bottom of leaves because that's actually where squash bugs are feeding. And then looking at my methods for leaf hardness, I looked at the adaxis, so like the top of the leaf, I looked at the large leaves that had been, the largest leaf that had been damaged, and then the largest non-damaged leaf in all of the different treatments. And using a penetrometer in grams of force, I inserted the penetrometer 5 times, took an average for each of those leaves. And then, so going to my findings, we actually found something a little bit surprising, is that herbivore and mechanical damage actually decrease non-glandular trichome density. So the plant likely downregulates its physical defenses because trichomes just aren't working. These types of trichomes, the non-glandular trichomes, aren't working to ward off cucumber beetle. So the cucumber beetle is still damaging the plant, really like demolishing it, skeletalizing it. And the plants want to start investing in maybe other areas, so they're downregulating it. And then when we looked at glandular trichomes, however, we see across all different treatments that, so these are the ones, again, that have the capacity actually to secrete secondary metabolites and maybe are more helpful in countering against, herbivores. So the plants need them, and therefore they stay kind of consistent across all groups, in damaged groups. And then this is the assay I did of leaf hardness, and I actually found that there seems to be a pretty clear trend that in the more damaged groups, these leaves tend to be softer, but because I only had, a couple of replicates, another time, if we do this again, we might actually have more statistical power to really say that there is a significant trend. So with a larger sample size, potentially. This is a different sample size than the last one. Well, we don't have anything conclusive here. A lot of this data actually, provides some possible explanations for why squash bugs are doing better on cucumber beetle damaged plants. So the first one is that, plants' trichome density is decreasing. So this could be contributing to squash bug growth because there are just, fewer of like as a result of the cucumber beetles coming and damaging these plants, the plants are actually becoming more sensitive, to and more susceptible to squash bugs actually coming on as a result of them trying to defend themselves against cucumber beetles, and investing in other areas. And then the second point is that damaged leaves might be, we don't know for sure, but might be less hard than undamaged leaves. And this, according to the literature, might actually show that the squash bugs are able to more easily penetrate their stylet into squash leaves and are then able to get more access to more nutrients more easily. And then because we added that mechanical treatment, just to see if squash bugs are responding to just damage in general rather than cucumber beetle damage specifically, it seems like defense suppression might actually not be limited to insect herbivory, and that there might be some sort of plant-induced sensitivity and plants might just be responding to damage in general. So next steps is that since these plants are actually kind of small, again, we can't say anything with certainty that this is actually what's happening out in nature, and that there's still a bunch of possibilities that are still open, and that could be that's things like phytochemistry that might be happening. And so specific to squash plants, they actually have cucurbitacins, which are supposed to be toxic to herbivores and are anti-feedant. But what the cucumber can do, according to papers and literature, is that they can actually acquire cucurbitacins as a defense against other herbivores, and they're able to use them rather than they're not actually warding them off. So we might see a difference there. And then we also might look at, we could also see a difference in induced defense regulators, things like jasmonic acid. And so we prepared all of these samples, and thanks to a researcher at Geneva, we were able to put this into the HPLC, and we're just awaiting to get results from this. So excited to find out more if there's something going on with phytochemistry and phytohormone signals. So we'll hopefully be hearing back soon. And then future steps is that maybe there's a field study. So to see if that could be done, that could actually look at if damage type, if cucumber beetle damage is actually making yield worse when combined with squash bug damage, or maybe just mechanical damage combined with squash bug damage might be decreasing yield. We don't know if this is actually affecting, because that's really what farmers and growers care about, right? If this is affecting yield. So that could be a cool room for for future work. So. And I want to thank everybody in the lab. Big shout out to Jennifer and to my mentor, Matt, and to all the other undergrads in the lab, some great people to work with, and special thanks to Megan, Delaney, and George for help. Does anyone have any questions?
So what would you have done differently in this project?
I think the biggest thing was probably like timing, that we just didn't have enough time to really to get those results from the phytochemistry data, and it feels kind of like that things are still really open to future results to really determine if that's what is facilitating squash bug growth. So just really time. Like, I'm excited to hear about this, the phytochemistry stuff, and there might be a difference there. Yeah.
May I ask another question? Or?
Okay.
What are the limitations of your study?
Yeah, great question. So I have a little slide on that. So like I said, plants, yeah, some limitations. So the first one is probably that these plants, like I said, are really small. And so trichomes might be smaller, things might be, not exactly as they appeared in lab. The other one is that we're actually accelerating this study because we're putting the squash bugs, like I said, it's a no choice assay. And so we put these squash bugs on damaged plants, and usually in nature, it really takes like 10 to 14 days for them to hatch on themselves. And so the plant has already changed quite a bit by then. And the second one is actually that bugs were found on damaged leaves and not on those newly emerged leaves. Well, just based off of observation, they might have been going there, but it's possible that more was going on with those damaged leaves than on the newly emerged leaf. Yeah. I had a hidden slide there. Glad you asked that question.
One more question. You mentioned that the squash bugs are attracted to leaves that have been damaged by the cucumber beetles, but do you know if they're attracted to leaves that have been damaged by other herbivores? And maybe that could play a role in justifying some of those possible explanations you had on one of those slides.
Yeah, that's a good question. So in this, in my particular study, it's just the lab study of we've actually damaged them with cucumber beetles, but it's possible that there are a bunch of different types of cucumber beetles as well. There's like the corn worm beetle that squash bugs might be responding to damage based, on other types of cucumber beetles, but this is really like in succession. The cucumber beetles come first and then the squash bugs come next. And so as Brzezowski, I had that slide up where they're actually, the squash bugs are actually attracted to the mating pheromone, vitatolactone. And so we know that they're going onto the plant as a result of that. But yeah, they might also be, I don't know, attracted to other things that, or other bugs, but we know that specific direct attraction does work. Yeah.